And I have a great story behind today's book because David Lewis has written a book that I just love. And it is called A Jewel in the Crown. And it is the first book in what I know is going to be a very wonderful series, The Secret Churchill Files. Hi, David.
Hi, how are you, Patsy?
Okay. I lived in England. I moved there when I was 21 years old and bought a cottage and in a little English village, which of course that was the life for me. There were three pubs, a sweet shop, a butcher, and that was really all we needed. And the sweet shop did just about everything. She also had a little post office, just like you see in
Right.
those little Agatha Christie movies. So she had that. She of course had milk, but the nicest thing was we called her the sweet shop because she had lovely candy display. And the boys from the local public school, which of course is a private school for Americans,
Mhm.
Reading private school, and the boys, it was all boys, of course, and they would come in their uniforms and they'd come to the sweet shop to buy they had a little allowance, and they would be speaking Latin. And they would speak Latin because, they just to show off. And
Yes.
they were so surprised that as an American, I understood them. And because that was one of the few subjects I loved in high school. And so I would talk to them in Latin. They were so surprised. They loved it. And of course, we had the three pubs, which are very important for an English village and
Essential.
essential, absolutely essential. But I'm so happy with this series, and because when I think of England, I think of Churchill. And here is one of I think it's one of the promo materials.
It's yes, it's actually a line from the fourth book in the series when Winston comes to the rescue, standing in the bow of the launch at night, tearing through the fog with a machine gun. And his wife looks out and says, "Good grief, it's Winston."
Oh, and yeah, he was always right there in the forefront. He wanted to see everything. And I know that I think it was your editor at Kensington made you a pillow out of that one.
No, it was my agent, and in fact I have it right here.
Oh, show it to us. Oh, good. Oh, that's so great. They could sell those.
Perhaps they will.
Perhaps they will. It's always good to have merchandise. Not every book has something that you can have
Yes.
merchandise. People love merch. That's a big thing in this world now of publishing. We like to have merch. And here's another one. This one is another saying. It's a little bit ruder for
Well,
Americans.
for Americans, yeah. This actually was one of Winston's favorite sayings.
No,
When things got really tough, he just would say, "Let's just keep buckling on."
yes,
Yeah.
very much him. So, but I thought it was cute, and I wanted to show that. Wow. So you started this series. Great, great. Is that you? I'm sorry. I heard some interference.
Yeah, I think that's you, not my end.
I could cut that out. Okay. So let me just go back. We'll talk about Katrin a little bit. Okay. As I was saying, Katrin is a great character. Katrin Colleen, right? Her last name is Colleen.
Yes.
And as I had a store actually in Wales, in Cardiff. So I spent a
Uh-huh.
great deal of time going back and forth between my home and there, and it was lots of fun. I never could understand anybody, but my store manager would give me reports, and she was okay. Although she, she really had a very Welsh accent, and she kept throwing in Welsh words, and I don't know if she was trying to tease me, but but as long as she was profitable, I said okay, we'll go for it. Because it is very special. It's a very special place, and I thought let's look at just to introduce you a little bit before we talk more about the book and the storyline. Just well, nowadays people like to get to know the authors, and I thought we'll start right from the beginning when you were a sweet little baby.
Yeah, I joke I'm the same weight I was then, just a bit taller.
Well, there's a little bit of
Yes. Yeah, Winston had a wonderful phrase. He said that people would say, "This baby looks like Winston." And Winston said, "All babies look like me." And I think that's absolutely true.
It does. Look, really, that sort of that little bit of a glare. Okay,
Hmm.
why are you bothering me?
Yeah, I was a fatty.
Oh, you're big. And that's right
Yeah.
after the war. So apparently in Wales there was must have been food still.
Oh, yes. Or if, or something. I don't know what they fed me, but boy, it sure had an effect.
It certainly did. Um, so yeah, thinking about Wales at that time, the war. How? What were your parents? Your father was in the coal mines.
No, my father was the only one in his family who was not. He worked as a painter for a local brewery. He would, the brewery owned a whole series of pubs and hotels, so he would go around painting them all. He was the only one. The rest were all coal miners.
Oh, I know that it in these towns. And I come from northern Michigan, and everybody up there they were in the copper mines. My father was one of the only brothers who didn't go into the mines. He would not go into those mines, not even for a visit. Years later, when I wanted to go, they turned it into a museum, and you could go down and you could see what it was like to be a copper miner. My dad wouldn't go down that thing for anything. He said, no way. Because, in fact, two of his brothers were in one of those, terrible explosions in the mine. So,
Huh?
yes, that was quite a life. But you had, look at now here. You don't look like Winston anymore. Here you are, so cute. You're absolutely adorable. They should have picked you up and put you in a film.
Yeah, Patsy, I remember this day so clearly. It was in school, and they taped up a little piece of fabric against a stone wall, put a chair in front of it, and there was this great line of kids, and they just said, "You sit down, click next, please." And when I asked my mother to send me photographs, I hoped she would send me this one. In fact, I have it on the wall right above my computer. I just remember the day so clearly.
It's so cute. I think maybe I'm going to print it out and put it above my computer because I think
Well,
I think
thank you.
it is a great. It's just a great photo. A
Yeah.
personality comes out there. You're so sweet, and you are so sweet. So you
Oh,
had from Wales. Somehow you landed up in California, where you are now, right?
yes, you're right that I was born in 1945, and growing up in my valley, there was no television, of course, but there were four movie houses, and they changed the show midweek, so you could go to a different movie every night. And we used to sneak in without paying because we had no money as kids. And so I grew up on American movies. I knew exactly where it is I wanted to go. And when I arrived in New York, I remember stepping out of the airport and seeing all these yellow taxis. And my first thought was, I'm home. And that never left me.
That that's so wonderful. It's a great story, and of course, you got into photography, and so that was sort of
Yes.
a way to break into Hollywood, right?
Yes. This is a front cover for Fujifilm. For some reason, this is my idea. For some reason, there's not an apple on my head, but a carrot. I have no idea why, but it seemed like a good idea at the time.
And did you actually let them shoot arrows at you?
No, those are my arrows. I fired the arrows first, and then I stood in front of them.
Then you did it. Oh, what the heck? Okay, you're not Swiss. You're not going to stand there with an apple on your head like some fool.
I'm not that brave either.
Photography and some of the other work that you did. I know this is a lovely shot of.
But that was in New Zealand. Yeah.
So, so your work in the showbiz world has taken you many places.
Yes, I have been very fortunate. It has taken me all over the world, which is why I never understand the idea of taking a vacation, because that costs money, and then you go there and sit on the beach and say, now what? Whereas when we were shooting movies, I was flown there and I got paid and I got to see places most people wouldn't. And New Zealand was a wonderful place, very terrific. Like Britain, 1960, at the time.
And here's with who?
The guy with the muscles, it's a muscle suit, is Weird Al Yankovic. we shot a movie called UHF, which I'm told became a kid's favorite. I shot a lot of music videos, and I shot a lot of Weird Al's videos, and he was great fun to work with.
Oh, yeah, he would be. He would be. But then finally you decided to sit down and start writing this series. And I think it's going to be a great hit because it is wonderful. I love the idea of the time period. I love the storyline. And of course, Katrin. Katrin is, as you said, she's strong, she's smart. And tell us her background. Once she comes to London, she becomes a policewoman.
Yes. May I tell you about who she's based on, which I think is important?
Oh, absolutely.
She's based on my mother. My mother was the middle child of, I think, 10 kids. And when she was 14, she was sent away to work as a downstairs maid at a hotel in England. And then she had to send her money back to keep the other kids at home. This was during the 20s and 30s, and it was a very poor time. And it affected her because she was probably one of the brightest. She had a great outlook on life. And I think it was a great injustice for her. And then when she came back, she got married to my dad, who was a really lovely man, but emotionally remote, had 3 kids. And I always felt that she deserved a better life. I would like to have seen her have a better life. And when I was working on the Katrin character, I thought, I'm going to give my mom a better life. I'm going to give her a life where she gets to be a secret agent and go all over the world. Because she also had this really wicked sense of humor that would creep up on you, and it would be unexpected. And so I thought, that's it. So Katrin Colleen is my mom.
Oh, that's a great story. That's lovely. I think that's oh,
It's a true story.
yeah, exactly. It's wonderful. As a mother, I always look at the beginning of a book and to see who it's dedicated to, and I always get a kick out of it when it's dedicated to a mother because
Mm-hmm.
it's nice. I think that warms my heart. So tell us about, many people don't realize all those years ago there were women police in London. It was
Yes, not many. And initially, the authorities thought that they couldn't do the job unless they were accompanied by at least one male constable. And they soon showed that they could do the job very well. But it was not easy.
Let's talk about the whole premise of the book and what you mean when you say jewel of the crown, because for many people, they've heard about the jewels and they've seen now with all of these recent weddings, we've been having a treat of being able to see some of the crown jewels. And here are some of them.
Mm-hmm.
And, and this is actually interesting because this is the first color photograph that they took. I
Oh,
didn't
really?
realize that it wasn't until 1952 they even did a color photograph. The war really, it took a lot of, when you look back on it, they could have had television already in the 40s.
Yes.
But everything had to go for the war effort. So when that happened, even color photography was gone. I just thought we would look at that. And then, of course, now we're talking about the tower. And you're going to explain where that is and why it's important to this and why the jewels are there.
All right. All right, let me explain. Let's World War II, Britain, Winston Churchill. The country is terrified that Adolf Hitler is about to invade. Not Adolf, because he doesn't like the food, but his army. And what they're concerned about is he has an army that will rip up and steal anything that's not nailed down. They've already taken Czechoslovakia, Poland, France, Netherlands, and Belgium. So Winston decides that what he will do is get the crown jewels out of the country, somewhere safe, Dallenburg, Canada. He gets 2 of his agents to get a horse box. They put the jewels in the horse box, cover it with hay bales, and they drive it up through Scotland, where it will go onto a ship to Canada for safety. He chooses 2 young agents, Katrin, who was our little fiery Welsh socialist, whose big ambition in life is to turn Buckingham Palace into a home for retired miners or fallen women. Actually, that would be fun if they were both there. And her other And the other one is Lord Hector, who is landed gentry and therefore a class enemy of Catherine. And they have to pretend to be married. And Winston's idea is that they will stop at country estates on the way north because they're safe and secure. And they have to pretend to be married while they're doing it. So they fight and bicker their way up through the north of England to Scotland. And then the jewels are stolen and Lord Hector disappears, which means Catherine is now surrounded by 360 degrees of enemy, one of whom may be Lord Hector. And she has to find a way out and find out who did it and get the jewels back before Goering decides to get them for his wife. That's the basic story.
Exactly. And we should explain that a few years before that, or maybe a year or so, Winston Churchill had actually gotten the gold
Yes.
out. Many people don't realize this was a big undertaking, move the gold out of England. Many people thought it was crazy, and in fact, if the ship had been sunk,
Mhm.
oh boy, I don't know what would have happened to Winston at that point. But this
Oh,
was
yes.
this was something important because one even now today you talk to people and they do not understand how close it was, how very close it was. They watch old movies, they say, oh, there was no chance that England would have
Mhm.
ever been invaded. And yet,
Yes.
as I when I lived in England, and one of the things, we had an airplane, so we used to spend a lot of time at an old RAF base where there were
Mhm.
still pilots who had flown when they were young men at the time, and when I met them they were old, and but they would still talk about these flights and what it was like, and the fact that and in the village they expected that there would be an invasion. And in my cottage I still had the hooks on top of each window where the blackout curtains were.
Uh-huh.
You
Right.
know, when I first moved into the place, and because they had covered a lot of stuff with wallpaper, they had covered up all of the fireplaces. I had four fireplaces. When I got there, there were no fireplaces when I found the cottage because they had plastered them over. But I saw from on the roof, I had chimneys, and I thought somewhere there's got to be a fireplace, and there were. But they in the 50s they wanted to be very modern, very American. They covered it up, and they even put acoustic tiles over the beams.
Oh, I remember those, yes. Horrible.
Horrible things. I couldn't believe it
Mhm.
because I ripped
Mhm.
all of that out, but I did not take out the hooks for the blackout curtains because I thought that belonged there. People were prepared, and if America hadn't entered the war, who knows what would have happened. So this
Right.
was a really important thing, and of course they would have headed. Germans would have headed for the crown jewels. That
Yes.
can you imagine? You know,
No, I don't want to. I did discover recently what actually happened to the crown jewels. They were stuffed into a biscuit tin and buried 20 feet below a floor in Windsor Castle. And I think that they sent the people who buried it to Canada because that way no one knew where it was.
exactly. There was a lot of clever work around it, and you
Mhm.
managed to create two characters. And so let's talk a little bit about class warfare. And again, it's so interesting that even when I lived there, and I don't know how bad it is today, but when I was there in the 80s, wow, it wasn't much different. I mean, the upper class and the lower class. In America, we think of the rich people, celebrities, and all those people who have money,
Mhm.
and the politicians who have money. But in England, it's where you come from. It's your
Yes,
background.
it's different. It is different now. But I remember as a kid, I could listen to someone, and after a sentence or two, I could tell them where they came from and probably what they did for a living. Uh, so it's also down to affluence and mobility. I believe that the great change came with the Beatles in 1962, because up until then, all of the accents on television and radio were very precise Oxford English. And then in come these four guys who were talking like Liverpudlians and completely unashamed. And gradually, what happened was the regional accents became more acceptable. And that was one of the big changes. And affluence came when people got cars. My dad got his first car when he was 55. It was a little tiny Austin A35, smaller than a Mini, and it had 75,000 miles on the clock. I still remember the license plate, TW0790. He was so proud of his car. But when you started driving around, you're more mobile, and the localities tend to blur a little bit. So now it's much more difficult. You can listen to a guy and then discover that he's worth $10 million. So things have changed. Although the English have this wonderful way of insulting you. I don't know if you came across it. They can listen to you and say, "Oh, he's very clever." And that is a stiletto.
You don't want them to say that to you.
Uh,
You don't want them. Now,
oh, it's wicked.
I know. Now, for Americans, they didn't do that as much, but I know for to Welsh or to Irish or even to Scottish, they don't, it doesn't matter when they have an attitude. Let's just put it that. And
Yeah.
of course, for Hector and for Katrin, there is when they're having differences in class, it's real. And
Hmm.
Katrin there is a socialist. She comes from this mining community, and where she wants all the rights. It's very funny, and she has a lot to learn from Hector, and then Hector has a lot to learn from her.
Yes, yes. Well, she comes from where I came from, which is a tiny miner's house. The rooms, when I went back, I measured the rooms. They're 8 feet across. 2 rooms down, 2 rooms up. No bathroom. A zinc bath that gets pulled in front of the coal fire every Friday night with this much water in it. An outdoor toilet and no hot running water. So that was her background, as was mine, and that compared to Lord Hector, who has his large house. So there's a huge, it's a miracle they can actually even understand each other because the differences are so great.
But they do come to an understanding over time, and throughout the next books, I'm sure we're going to find a lot of developments in both of their opinions.
Yes. When I got the first advertising materials for this book, the publishers understandably written it out as a Catherine and Lord Hector story, and I said, no, it's not. It is her story. Hector is in the first two. I'm just starting on the sixth book right now, but there are two in which he completely disappears because I didn't want it to be. It's a woman, but it's really about a guy, and she's his sidekick. It has to be about her, and that gives an entirely different feel to a story.
Yes, you're right. Let's keep her strong, and you never know where her life is going to bring her over over this series because it can change. But
Hmm.
the dynamics in this one between them is interesting, and it does point out so many of the problems during World War II that people don't know. All of these things of what they were facing, what they had to look forward to. Now, in England, it was a long time after the war before things changed because I don't know when it came. The entire thing of not having indoor bathrooms in
Hmm.
these smaller towns. This took a long time before things started to change.
Yeah, I had left home before they had an indoor toilet and hot running water. But the changes came after the First World War because so many young men from the landed gentry, shall we say, were killed, the young officers, they were slaughtered by the thousands. And so the country estates started to crumble because there was no heir to carry it on. And also there were death taxes. And so there was this incredible change. And which is why even Lord Hector, he's landed gentry, but he doesn't really have any money. And when they're traveling up through England, they stay at various estates, some of which Hector knows, but one or two are in very poor condition. There's one, Hammersley Hall, where it's just the old lord who is dying and his faithful butler, Wallace. There are only just the two of them there. And when one of them dies, the other one will die too. So,
I'm glad you mentioned Wallace because he's one of my favorite characters in the book, and I remember when I
mhm.
got to that it's only a few pages, but Wallace comes alive, and anybody who reads the book will always remember Wallace. And I cried. I cried. It was so touching. You wrote it so beautifully. A
Thank
wonderful character. And I knew when I read that, I said to myself, this is a great writer.
oh,
Up to that, I mean, I knew, right from the beginning, I knew you had you set the right tone, you had the right characters. But when I got to Wallace, at that point, I said, this is a writer par excellence, above so many. You stand out because this kind of writing you don't get that often in nowadays. For a character to stand out like that, for a character to touch your heart, you're reading a mystery story, and then when somebody just takes it away in this way, gets into your heart and soul, because you will never forget Wallace once you read him.
yeah, yeah. I love Wallace. It was one of my favorite things to write because it's. I think so often in these kind of thrillers, it's very easy to have the secondary characters just be two-dimensional, and I think that's not. It doesn't work for me. I really wanted to have the people be real, and yeah, I have a great affection for Wallace. I thought he was a sweetheart and a very honorable man, which is wonderful.
Exactly, very honorable, and I
Hmm.
think that might come this, and all of your minor characters are standouts, and that might come from watching a lot of movies in the 50s, because so many of the movies in the 30s, 40s, and 50s, if you'll notice, the movies have the extra characters, what
Hmm.
we would now call extras in a movie. They always gave these characters a few lines. It didn't matter. It could be the porter on the train. It could be the butler. It could
Right.
be just the taxi driver. It just these little lines, and they gave it because these people were on contract, and so they didn't have to pay them extra if they gave them a
Hmm.
line. Today, that's why many people don't understand why today's movies don't seem as deep. They don't have this depth
Right.
of quality because every you cannot give lines to people unless you're going to pay them. So you extra. So you might have a whole movie filled with different taxi drivers, and they never have a line,
Right.
because
Right.
if you give them lines, just a few lines, few dozen words, you have to pay
Hmm.
them, and then they're going to get royalties forever, and so they don't. And but that's why so many modern movies have no character to them, whereas
Right.
you need these little characters. If you go back and look at a movie like Arsenic and Old Lace with Cary Grant is one of the best movies, because all
It's a
of the people,
wonderful movie. Yeah.
isn't it fantastic?
Yeah.
But
I love it.
all of the little characters have these lines. They're fast, they're quick, they just throw them in there, but they are so good. And the taxi driver at the end said, I'm not a teapot. So it's just one after another. And that's why with you don't have throwaway characters. You
Hmm.
use the people who they come across, and you give them a little bit of life. Wallace isn't going to live forever, but boy, he lives forever in the heart of a reader.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you so much. One thing I should mention, it almost slipped my mind, is that as far as possible, I only write about locations if I've either lived in them or if I've spent some considerable time in them, because to me it makes it much more rounded. Apart from the last two, the last book, but one is called Winston of Arabia, and that's in Egypt. And Winston rides a camel across the Libyan desert. I haven't been to Egypt, but otherwise, all of the locations I know very well, and to me
Oh,
that
well,
makes a
I'm
big
sorry. You're going to
difference.
have to ride a camel. And in order to make that real, and as a matter of fact, for a promo, you should get on a camel.
I did
Turn.
when I was a little boy at Bristol Zoo, and I didn't like it because
It's a funny
but
experience, isn't it?
there's a wonderful story of, and the reason I got it is that Winston Churchill in the late 20s, went to Egypt with Clementine and T.E. Lawrence, and there's this wonderful picture of them riding a camel, and they're all dressed as if they just stepped out of Downing Street. And they all took off, and Winston promptly fell off the camel. And the camel guide said, "If you like, sir, I have a horse." And Churchill said, "No, I came out on a camel. I'm going back on a camel." I when I wrote Winston of Arabia, I had to put him on a camel,
Oh
and
yeah.
he is.
Oh, you're making me crazy because I have so long to wait.
You do indeed, and I wish it were tomorrow.
I do. I won
Yeah,
book 2 already. This is,
but
um
that's book 5.
I know. That's what I'm saying. It's
Yeah.
oh, it's too long because this is so much fun. I remember when I finished this book, I said to myself, "Oh my goodness," because usually it's like a year between them, and I thought, "Oh no, I can't wait." Of course, I'm lucky. I get them a few months in advance, so I'm
Right,
luckier than other people, and then I can say, "Ah, I know what's
right.
going to happen. I'm not telling you." And when you mentioned the little towns that they go through, and so they get the jewels in and from the tower, and which in itself is a little bit of an exciting moment. But this trip up north from London, going all the way up to Scotland, that is quite a trip. I have done it many times, actually, in a car, and also we often flew to Scotland from
Hmm.
our little RAF grass field near Reading, and so we flew that route right over those towns that you're writing about.
Hmm.
So tell us about some of the towns and what you remember about them.
What has always fascinated me about England more than Wales or Scotland is the lunatic names. I mean, all of there are some absolutely unbelievable names, and I thought this is going to be a great chance for me to use them, and I use them throughout all of the books because they are just so funny, and all of the names are real. All of the estates are real too. I change one or two names just in case, but everything you read, all the places they go to exist, even with all the crazy names.
I know, and they do have crazy names. And oh, and then when you get to Scotland, they're even crazier because you can't pronounce them for anything.
Go to Wales and they're completely impossible.
Oh no, I wouldn't even try in Wales. Wales, I absolutely gave up. I was in Scotland. I would try until I went to Kirkcudbright.
Cucubra.
Yeah, I didn't know that. Every time we got lost, we were lost, and so we'd see people walking along the side of the road, and we see a farmer, we'd see and we'd stop, and I say, "Where is Kirkcudbright? We're heading to Kirkcudbright," and all these Scottish would be so sweet. A little bit here, a little wee bit. Well, we're going all over the place. We spent an
Mhm.
hour just going in circles until finally somebody said, "Oh, you mean Cuckoo
Cucubra.
Breen?"
Yeah.
I was on the trail of Charlotte Bronte because she went there,
Uh-huh.
and so I
Hmm.
was going everywhere from Hayworth on in her tracks, trying to see everything she saw. But yeah, those little towns are delightful. They are. Each one has a flavor and a pub, if nothing
Uh,
else.
yes, it has to have. I think they always started with the pub, then the
Yes,
post office, and then they built the village.
yes. The rest came after it. But
Yeah.
as long as you had a pub, you could be a village. I don't think
Yeah.
you could be a village if you didn't have a pub. That was
I'll,
it.
I'll tell you an interesting thing about the Welsh and the Scottish love Americans, and they will do an interesting thing. My then wife was American, and we were in Barra, which I write about in the book, the little island in the Outer Hebrides. And we walked into a pub, and they were all speaking Gaelic. And they looked at us and continued speaking Gaelic until my wife spoke, and they heard her accent, and they started speaking English. If she had been English, they would have continued to speak Gaelic.
Oh
But
yeah.
because she was American, they welcomed it. And it was really funny because in Castle Bay one night we were invited to the village dance. It was like a big village hall. Well, it's big. And so we go in, and it's 10 o'clock at night, and they're playing rock and roll music. The place is empty. So we go into the parking lot. Everyone's sitting in in their cars drinking. At midnight, they change the music to Scottish country music. The place is jammed. Everyone just jumps into the hall, and they all start doing these wonderful Scottish dances. My wife couldn't believe it. It was just a complete change.
It is. When you're an American traveling around, they treat you differently. And I was actually, at one point, I was traveling with a British girlfriend, and she said, I never would get treated nicely like this.
Mhm.
And it's serious. There's no question about it. Yeah, it's wonderful. And as I said, I love being in Wales. I love
Mhm.
going around there. It's a beautiful place. It's a beautiful place.
Yes,
For you, being in California now, are you going to be going back to England for a book signing or something like that?
I hope so. I don't. Nothing has been said so far. I guess it's early days. The farthest afield I'm going is Scottsdale. That's in October.
Well, I think once this you have a few books under your belt here with this series, they should bring you to Harrods and you can sign books there. Um,
Oh, I'm all for it. I'll be happy to do it. I can even speak English, so
oh,
it's
that's right. I think it's a big task to take this on, to do so many books and to really dedicate yourself to it. But I think you're having lots of fun.
I am. I am.
Research into that period of time, that's also fun, isn't it?
Uh, I come from a coal mining town, and now I sit down and I write books. What a life! I mean, what a life! I couldn't be happier. I feel absolutely. I don't like the word blessed, but I just feel so fortunate. It's really quite exciting.
Well, I think it's a wonderful series, and people, when you get this book, it will be really nice to pull out a map or Google it and follow along on the
Hmm.
trail to these towns, and then when you're going on vacation, go to England and take this journey yourself and stop at some of these little towns and hold up
Yes,
the book and send it to David Lewis, and he will be happy to see them, right?
yes, and say hello to Wallace, or at least maybe Wallace's grandson by now.
Do you have a website that you want people to visit?
I'm. It's. I will have it by the end of the month. I had one, but it was hacked, and I had to just destroy it and start all over. So I'm right in the middle of building it, but it will be done September 1st.
And are you on Facebook? I don't know. People like to know that stuff.
I am, yes.
Okay, so it's David Lewis, author, or just David Lewis?
David Novels,
David Novels.
yes.
Oh, okay, I'll put that up on when I put this program up online. I'll put that. Okay, so people
Hmm.
know. But David, it's wonderful to talk to you. You have to let me know the next release date. You'll be back here, and we'll be talking about Winston Churchill and about Katrin, because she's a fantastic character, and just about all the other adventures that you're going to be getting her into.
Yes,
And it's fun for you. The book two is called what?
it's called A Beacon in the Night.
Beacon in the Night. Okay,
Yes.
I'm looking forward to that. And David Lewis, thank you so much for joining me today. It's been absolutely wonderful to talk to you. And I will keep promoting this book because I want people to have fun reading about England and about the wonderful characters that you have developed.
Thank you, Patsy.
Oh, thank you. Bye bye now. Bye.
Bye bye.
And mama ain't around.